So welcome to another episode of Echo and Obsidian Studios. Today, I want to go over some things that I'll learn about effectively sanding resin figures, and specifically talk about how much of a shit show the internet can be. I don't know about you, but I'm not one of those people who's very comfortable about sharing himself. This is not an easy thing for me to do, and sharing my work was not an easy thing to do. I found a Facebook group for adult people who do printing and painting, and they allowed NSFW kind of things, so I posted my yixuan figure, and surprisingly got a lot of likes from it. 96, close to 100. It's the most I've ever really gotten for any communication on the public internet. So I knew when I posted it I was going to get some comments about like, you should have sanded her, because it was obvious. I didn't sand. I was more interested in learning to paint at the time. And one guy got really personal and weird about it, and that took me a lot to internalize it and say, like, you know what, it doesn't matter. People seem to like it. You're doing okay. So, like, that's part of it. Now, the next thing to talk about is sanding, because that's what was wrong. I think if I had sanded her first, she would have come out potentially flawless. Not flawless, I'd have fucked something up, but a lot better. And a lot of it was just being nervous about, I'm going to fuck this thing up. And I mean, you can. You don't want, like, I'm not going to sand really tiny surfaces, but the larger the surface, the more chance you're going to have something you need to sand down. Now, also from this group, I learned something very interesting. I had always operated under the assumption you should just be kind of, warming your supports and then pulling them away. But one of the guys in that group mentioned, you're better off to actually snip or cut them away and leave some material on and then sand it all away. Because when you pull it, that's what leaves those divots. But if you're sanding the things away, you're creating a smooth surface from the start, not actually having to sand down to a surface that is level at where the divot stopped. So, that was new. The thing that made me nervous about that is, like, I really have difficulty with the clips while I'm wearing gloves and the resin. So I ordered a hypersonic knife to try. This is normally what they're used for. It's essentially a really expensive vibrating blade. So it's got like almost like an X-Acto knife head, but the blade itself just vibrates really, really quickly. So it's essentially doing the motion for cutting for you. And the benefit to that is you can hold the thing in one hand and kind of cut through even large support. I mean, this stuff will cut through cardboard, and it's used for a lot by cosplayers to cut into the supports, leaving that amount left so that I can then just sand it away. Couple other things I learned. Sanding is not an art, or it's not science. It feels more like an art, namely because you're having to fit to the shape that you're using. Like I bought a sanding block, not registering, like, you're not planing a fucking piece of wood here. It's a tiny ass figure, and it didn't register at the time. It's more about, like, get the sheets and sponges. The sponges are really great, especially for the really higher grits when you're trying to really clean out, namely because they kind of mold to a shape of their surface, and that's really kind of nice. They wear down a lot faster. So what I did is I've got some 120, 180, 320, 400 grit. Start with the medium grit, especially if it's really nasty. Like, that's what you would start with. For Delta, it's something about the lychee supports or just the way the model was. It had a very oddly lumpy exterior for hair, specifically. It's just a huge body of it. So you go over that with, the 120 or the 100, and then fold it into little triangles to get into the smaller areas. And then you go over it with a grit above it until it's smooth. Now, what I also do is I will use the compressor. So after I've done some sanding, the compressor's on, it's just not attached to the airbrush, and I'll just blow the dust away and then run my hands back over it to figure out, is this where I want it to be? And if you get into the higher grits, 300 or 400, it looks pretty clean by the time you're done. So I went through this earlier for the parts that I already had for Delta. So another thing I forgot, on the good side, all of my parts for the Elegoo came in today. The secondary bin was placed in the Elegoo. I haven't bothered setting TFP film into the original one yet, but I am printing the rest of the major components of Delta outside of the base. Once these are done, I'm going to have to go through the same process, but I went through all the parts that I did have and looked for artifacts left over from, the actual print and started sanding over them. And this process went exactly as I mentioned. It started at 100, you kind of get it to where you want it to be, and then you go over it with 120, and then I would move to the sponge, which is 320, and lastly, the extra fine at 400, just to kind of get it where I want. Now, the hair is where all of the work went. The legs had a lot of physical, like protruding remnants. Those weren't that bad to take off. Just one thing to keep note, as the parts get smaller, sanding effectively gets a lot harder. One of the areas that I had to sand some of these supports away from was at the top of the legs, at the top of the part, right underneath the band that goes around the leg, and above another extruded feature. So I couldn't just wildly just take the entire face off, because I'd have taken that entire feature off. It was very much like fold this at an angle that I can get to, support it from the inside, and slowly, kind of like you're sharpening a knife, grind that away, and then repeat that through. And by the time you get to the high grit, it's actually a little bit safer just to go try and cover a larger area, because I couldn't really notice much difference to that raised artifact. And, it worked out pretty well. We'll see, obviously, once it gets into priming. I can't actually go prime these now, which I think I probably will do shortly hereafter, just to get them ready, and then set them aside, print the next parts. The base for this figure is just atrociously large, especially for the size of the figure, but I'll print that out. I don't anticipate a lot of sanding for that. Regardless of the actual pre-support, I can actually just support it myself, or all of that's on the back end anyway, so you wouldn't see it. That's how I did it with Kaiju number 8, actually. None of the supports were on the front. They were all on the back. And that was also another thing that someone recommended on the group. They're like, it's kind of one of those things you'll learn over time. And I'm starting to see it. Like when I look at the part, I'll do auto orientation in Chi2 Box Pro. And then if I don't like the way it looks, I will move it around. So like they have a bad tendency to just move them vertical and not really care about the side at which place the supports go. So then I'll rotate it around and try to regenerate it until I get it to where I want. The faces, another thing, for some reason with the faces, these really tiny things, it'll slant at an angle and then just cover the front of it. And it's like, oh, wow, yeah, no, do the part that I'm never going to see again as the supports. So I'll go through all that, and then, we'll get back together when we get into painting, because we'll actually get into, first, after priming, we'll probably airbrush the face and the hair. I'm waiting for some new dry brushes to come in. I was really nervous about Delta, because the bulk of her she has this hair, but her ears had these tufts on it. And it's very layered, very feathery. And I was kind of nervous about it at first. And I was going through a course that I bought on Domestika, specifically to find his recommendations for airbrushing. And I realized real quick, like, this is probably the safest way to do layering that isn't airbrush. The big thing about airbrushing is, if you don't have great paint and you don't have a great airbrush and you don't have a great compressor, you've got to worry about things like you just engaging the air splatters, or you have too wide of a cone. You can shield. That is common with like blue tack, but it's just a lot of work for really small areas. Dry brushing may be the best thing. So like what I probably will do is shield. So like I'll cover everything around that area with blue tack, and then airbrush the base layer. That lighter tan for the tint for the highlights will actually try to dry brush on. It'll be a little bit faster, a lot less cleanup, and a lot less messy potentially. And then after that, if I need anything else, I will try a wash. If you're not familiar with this, a lot of people buy washes. It's a category of just how thin your paints are. The goal of a wash is essentially, I'm thinned enough so that I'll move into the crevices without covering the outer coat. If you're used to oil paint, this is almost a similar approach to what spirits do to medium. It's like the greatest thing about oil paints, and like the only thing I tolerate about oil paints. Oil paints take forever to dry, but if you have something that has a lot of recesses, like little carve outs and veins, you can add thinning or spirit meat. I don't think it's thinning. It's a form of medium thinner for the oil paint, and you load your brush and you just kind of set it into that recess, and it will flow out of the brush to fill it, and it's really great. Acrylics don't do that. This is as close as you can get, where you're just essentially thinning it. What happens is the fluid pools into the recesses, and then eventually the water evaporates and dries away. The paint stays, and you're left with that. If you dry brush it, you get the raised surfaces, the outer layers. If you do a wash, you end up getting more of those bottom layers. It's just one more tool in the arsenal, per se. So like that will be a big focus. The head will be taking the face part, getting the skin tone we want, airbrushing that, setting that aside. Doing the ears, blocking, doing the airbrushing, dry brushing the differential, and then we'll move on to our tests for water sliding. Because I'm not going to go straight on to her face with the water slided eye. That'll be like, I've got a couple of her face that I printed. I also have another sacrificial figure. We will try to essentially water slide onto those. And from there, we may be close to done, because the rest of it is very just nitty gritty paint, like we're going to go over the line. I will probably have an entire section of like process for me, like look at a part, largest body of area to cover, and then details, and then what is the plan for correction when you overplay a detail. Like you're trying to paint like a really thin line, you fuck up and slip to the side. It's not the end of the world. It's literally just go back over it with the other color that it was before, and then just keep doing that until it looks okay. Not magic, but we'll go through that whole process.